The rain felt like needles against my skin as I stepped out of the office that evening. My scarf was barely holding together, and my fingers ached from typing 12 hours straight. I couldn't remember the last time I had a proper lunch, and my spine felt like it was made of rusted wires. All I wanted was to get home, kick off my shoes, and forget the fact that I had 2 more supplier audits to finish by the end of the week. But that wasn't how my life worked. I didn't go home to rest. I went home to continue surviving. I barely noticed my feet moving toward the bus stop. It was muscle memory at that point. My brain was somewhere else, cycling through bills, insurance, Paige's overdue school payment, and the medication Jared had run out of 2 days ago. I kept forgetting to pick it up. I kept forgetting a lot of things. When I got home, the apartment was silent. Not peaceful, not warm, just hollow. The kind of silence that reminded you no one cared whether you walked in or didn't. Jared was in his usual place, the recliner in the corner of the living room. Facing the TV, sound barely audible. "Hey," I said as I took off my coat and tried not to drip water on the floor. "Hey," he muttered without turning around. Same tone, same response, same evening, every evening. I walked to the kitchen and filled the kettle, the sound of rushing water louder than anything else in the apartment. Once, Jared had been a man with fire in his eyes. He loved the road, the unpredictability of his job as a long-haul driver. He used to call me from rest stops just to describe the sunrise over Nebraska or the storm that nearly flipped his rig in Montana. But years of unhealthy eating, sitting too long, and ignoring every warning sign had caught up with him. Chronic back pain, a cardiac scare at 38. The doctors told him to find something else. He told them to go to hell. When the disability papers came through, it was his mother who made it happen. Gloria pulled every string she had, called in every favor. "He can't work anymore," she said, with an air of finality that silenced any room. "He needs care. And you, Lillian, you're his wife. That's your job now. Support him." I worked 60 hours a week. I packed every lunch, paid every bill, filled every prescription. I skipped meals so Paige could have what she needed. I pawned my jewelry when we couldn't afford her winter coat. I made casseroles out of frozen spinach and hope. And still, Gloria called every week to remind me that I wasn't doing enough. "He looks thinner," she'd say. "Maybe cook him something fresh once in a while." A real woman takes pride in her kitchen. I bit my tongue so hard it bled. Jared never defended me. Sometimes he nodded along. Sometimes he just scrolled through his phone while his mother dissected every flaw I had. I stopped expecting gratitude. I stopped expecting anything. 3 years ago, my manager, Grant Wallace, pulled me aside with a quiet smile. "You're outworking everyone on the floor," he said. "You need a break. You've earned it." He handed me a glossy brochure for a company-sponsored wellness retreat. Steam rooms, herbal therapy, massage. A week in the mountains. I looked at the pages like they were written in a language I'd forgotten how to read. Then I asked, "Could I give this to my husband instead?" Grant looked surprised, but he nodded. "If it'll help him recover, sure." So I packed Jared's bag. I wrote his supplement schedule, printed out maps, called the retreat to make special meal requests. And when he came back, sunburned and scowling, he tossed the gift basket in the trash and said, "Total waste of time. Nothing worked. Just a bunch of overpriced candles." But I hoped. I kept hoping. I told myself maybe next year he'd try harder. Maybe he'd learn a skill. Maybe he'd want to get better. Instead, he stopped asking me how work was. He forgot anniversaries. He never noticed when Paige brought home a painting or when I got promoted. He called my job cute. Meanwhile, I kept us alive. That night, as the kettle screamed, I stood at the sink, staring at the window fogging over. My reflection was tired. Not just physically, spiritually. I didn't recognize the woman in the glass anymore. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Grant. "Are you absolutely sure about your answer? Paris is still open. They want someone exactly like you." I didn't answer. Not yet. I turned off the kettle and walked to the living room. Jared was still in his chair. Paige's sweater lay crumpled on the armrest. He hadn't even folded it, hadn't noticed she left it. I sat down at the edge of the couch and whispered to myself, "This can't be the whole story. This can't be the end of me." 3 years ago, when Jared's diagnosis was still fresh and Gloria's voice still rang with certainty, I memorized every prescription in our medicine cabinet. I read side effect warnings like scripture. I rearranged the kitchen shelves so he wouldn't have to bend down. I stopped buying things that irritated his stomach. I started cooking like I was on a Food Network challenge, with half the ingredients, zero time, and all the judgment in the world. And yet Gloria still told me I wasn't doing enough. "He's lost weight," she'd say, like it was my personal failing. "A man needs warmth, care, a real home-cooked meal once in a while. What exactly do you do when you come home?" I'd stand there, gripping the phone tighter, biting back words that wouldn't make a difference. Jared never stepped in. Sometimes he'd agree. Sometimes he just stayed quiet, fiddling with his phone or flipping the channel like it wasn't his life she was criticizing, like it wasn't mine she was dismantling piece by piece. I stopped crying about it. Instead, I worked more, stayed later, cut back on groceries, applied for 2 side gigs I could do remotely on weekends. I told myself it was just a season, just until he got better. But he never got better. He never even tried. Around that time, Grant had noticed. He didn't say much at first, just left me coffee when I came in early, asked if I needed help running data sheets. One Friday afternoon, as the office lights dimmed and everyone else rushed out for happy hour, he leaned over the divider between our desks and said, "You haven't taken time off in 2 years. That's not sustainable." I forced a smile. Vacation isn't really an option right now. He raised an eyebrow. "It should be. You've earned it." The following week, he slid a brochure across my desk. A spa retreat, quiet cabins in the mountains, eucalyptus steam, restorative yoga. Company sponsored. Go. Breathe. You give us everything. Let us give something back. I stared at the page for a long time. Then I said, "Would it be possible to send my husband instead?" Grant looked surprised, but he didn't push. "If you think it would help." So I packed Jared's bag. Again, I wrote out his medication times, printed directions, emailed the resort about his diet. And when he came home, he dumped the complimentary lotion into the trash and muttered, "Bunch of nonsense. They don't understand real pain." He never said thank you. He never asked if I'd been okay while he was gone. And yet I kept doing it. I sent him every year. While I stayed behind and worked through migraines, managed overdue bills, helped Paige with science projects, and listened to Gloria scold me like I was some teenage girl who married her son too young and too clueless. There was one night, I remember it so clearly. Jared was asleep, mouth slightly open, the recliner tilted just enough that his breath rasped. Paige was coloring in her room. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of chamomile tea, staring out into our tiny backyard. The porch light flickered like it couldn't decide if it wanted to live or die. And I asked myself something I'd never dared to before. What if he never changes? What if this isn't a phase? What if this is it? I hated myself for thinking it. I felt like a monster, a terrible wife, a coward. I scolded myself and whispered back, "He's hurting. He needs time. You made vows." But the question didn't leave me. It planted roots. The next year, when Grant mentioned the Paris assignment, a 6-month R&D contract, full relocation support, higher pay, and the chance to bring Paige, I barely let him finish before I shook my head. "I can't," I said. He nodded, respectful as always. "If you ever change your mind, let me know." I walked home that evening in the rain. Jared did notice I was early. Paige had done her homework alone. The dishes were piled in the sink. And still, I stood at the stove and cooked something warm, because I believed that's what good women did. Later that night, while I sat on the floor folding laundry, Paige came into the room and asked, "Mom, are you happy?" I froze. My hands stopped moving. I couldn't look at her. I lied. I said yes, because that's what I thought mothers were supposed to say. But deep down, something had cracked open, and I couldn't shake the feeling that life was moving somewhere without me, and I was too tired to chase it. It happened on a Wednesday. I hadn't planned to come home early, but the migraine had gotten so bad I couldn't see straight. Grant noticed it before I said anything. He always did. "Go home," he said gently. "Log in later if you can, but please get some rest." I nodded and packed up my things, heart thudding from both the pain and the guilt of leaving unfinished work behind. When I stepped into the apartment, everything was quiet. The kind of quiet that used to feel like a refuge, but now just felt like distance. Jared glanced up from the couch as I took off my shoes. "Paige's headphones came," he said flatly. "Delivery guys downstairs waiting." I was about to go grab him. I didn't answer, just nodded as he shuffled toward the elevator in sweatpants and sneakers. He didn't look like someone struggling to move. His back didn't arch, his step wasn't slow. I watched him until the elevator doors closed, then turned toward the kitchen. I needed water, maybe tea, maybe silence. What I didn't need was a sink full of dishes, but that's what greeted me. Cereal bowls, a glass with dried orange pulp, a plate crusted with marinara. Paige had left in a hurry for school that morning, and Jared, well, he never washed a dish if I was home to do it. I sighed, rolled up my sleeves, and turned on the faucet. The water pressure had been finicky for weeks, but today it surged out like it had a point to make. It splashed against the stack of plates and sprayed the counter. I reached for the sponge just as a few droplets hit Jared's phone, lying face up near the sink. It was a new model. I'd bought it for him just 2 days earlier for his birthday, saving for months in silence. He hadn't even thanked me. The phone vibrated once, then lit up. A voice message began to play automatically through the speaker. At first, I didn't realize what I was hearing. Then Gloria's voice came through, sharp and unmistakable. "I told you, Jared, I don't like this idea of Cassidy moving in while Lillian's still there. It's messy. She's going to figure it out." "Cassidy?" I froze. My hands were still wet, the sponge hanging limp in one. I reached for the phone, and without even thinking, I unlocked it. He hadn't changed the code. Same 4 digits he always used. I tapped into the messaging app. There were dozens of voice memos between him and his mother. Dozens. Some going back weeks. Some days. My hands shook as I tapped on the previous one. Jared's voice filled the kitchen. "Mom, Cassidy's different. She gets me. She doesn't nag. She doesn't guilt-trip me. She actually listens. I'm done with this martyr act Lillian keeps playing. I convinced her not to take the Paris offer. She thinks it's her own choice. But once she's out of the country, it's just me and Cassidy. She'll keep sending money. Guilt's good for that. And Paige doesn't need to know anything." I dropped into the nearest chair. My knees wouldn't hold me anymore. The kitchen blurred around me, like someone had taken my world and twisted it 90 degrees. I couldn't hear anything but his voice, that smug, calculated tone, as if I were nothing but an obstacle, an account, a function. I kept listening. Another message. Gloria again. "She's always thought she's better than us. But you listen to me. If Lillian finds out you've been faking this pain and letting Cassidy live there, she'll blow it all up. Your disability claim? Gone. Your future? Gone. You think the state won't look into it." And then Jared again. "Relax, Mom. We're not idiots. Lillian's too busy playing Florence Nightingale to notice. She's not going to Paris, remember? And if she does, great. Then she's out of the way. Cassidy, and I can finally have a normal life. Plus, if she files for divorce from overseas, I can probably get a chunk of the apartment, maybe even support payments. I'm the disabled one, remember?" That last sentence hit me harder than anything else, not because it was cruel, but because it was deliberate. They had planned this, all of it. My sacrifices, my broken back, my insomnia, none of it mattered. I was just a chess piece they'd been moving, a pawn too exhausted to realize I'd never been a queen. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat there, gripping the edges of the stool, feeling my fingertips go numb. My stomach rolled like I might be sick. But deeper than that, somewhere beneath the shock, was a voice. Small, steady. Leave. Now. Before I knew it, I was standing. I walked to the hallway, picked up my phone, and scrolled to Grant's contact. I hit call. He answered immediately. Lillian. I breathed once. I'm going, he said. Paris. I'm taking it. There was a pause. Then his voice, calm and solid. Good. We'll finalize everything in the morning. I hung up. I didn't go back to the kitchen. Didn't clean the dishes. Didn't finish the tea I'd meant to make. I just stood there in the dim hallway, listening to the apartment settle around me like a house I no longer lived in. I wasn't Lillian Parrish, the wife of a sick man. I was someone else now. Someone waking up. I didn't pack in anger. I didn't throw things into bags or slam drawers the way people do in movies when they finally snap. No. I folded pages, sweaters, like I always did. I made a checklist in my notebook. I confirmed our flights, printed the itinerary, and emailed the school in Paris. Every movement was quiet, precise, deliberate, because this time I wasn't running. I was choosing. When I told Jared, he blinked at me from the recliner like I'd just spoken in a different language. You're taking the job? Now. I nodded. Yes. He paused the TV. You said no. You said it didn't feel right. I changed my mind. He laughed, one of those hollow, disbelieving scoffs that always made my skin crawl. That's just perfect. Go ahead, leave. Let's see how long you last over there without me doing everything for you. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He didn't know yet that I had already filed the papers. 2 days after we landed in Paris, I sat across from a French-American attorney named Claire Dupont. She was graceful and razor-sharp, the kind of woman who could silence a room with one sentence. We'll file for divorce from here, she explained calmly. The apartment, custody, all of it will handle everything through international agreement. It's not uncommon. I nodded. Do it. Outside her office window, the Seine glimmered in the morning sun. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. The apartment Grant's team had arranged for me, and Paige was modest but warm. 2 small bedrooms, a tiny balcony, and a view of a bakery that opened at 6 a.m. every day like clockwork. Paige started school near the embassy and, to my surprise, adjusted faster than I did. Within a week, she had friends, stories, jokes about how French math was weird but kind of fun. I caught her laughing again, really laughing, the kind that reached her eyes. And I was working, God, was I working, but not the kind that drained me to the bone. I was formulating skincare prototypes, giving input in meetings, building something that had my name on it. For once, I wasn't invisible. And Grant was there. He never pushed. He never pried. He just showed up, quietly, kindly. We'd walk home after late meetings. Sometimes he'd bring pastries or 2 cups of espresso from the corner cafe. Sometimes he'd say nothing at all, and that silence was the safest space I'd known in years. One night, we sat on a bench near the river. The Eiffel Tower shimmered in the distance, and Paige had just gone to sleep after finishing a drawing she titled Mom's New World. I remember the way the wind felt that night, light, forgiving. Grant looked at me, not with pity, not with caution, but with presence. You're different here, he said. I smiled, soft and tired. I think I'm just remembering. Remembering what? That I exist. That was the night I knew I would never go back. Not even if Jared begged. Not even if Gloria showed up with crocodile tears, an apology rehearsed in front of a mirror. They didn't call me for weeks. Then the threats came. Emails from Jared. Voicemails from Gloria. You abandoned your husband. You'll regret this. You owe us. You're destroying your family. But they didn't know I had already turned everything over to Claire. And Claire Claire was surgical. "We're prepared to present financial records," she said in a letter to Jared's attorney. "If your client wishes to claim disability as leverage for spousal support, the court will require evidence, including recent communications that may suggest otherwise." It worked like a charm. Suddenly, Jared stopped responding. 3 days later, he signed the divorce papers. But, of course, he still demanded his portion of the apartment. And that's when Claire made her second move. She submitted documentation proving that I had paid every single mortgage installment, every repair, every tax. Jared had contributed nothing, not even utilities. If he wanted half the proceeds, he'd have to repay his half of the debt. And just like that, his share disappeared into numbers and facts and obligations he never imagined would matter. The apartment sold. I walked away with enough to cover Paige's tuition for the next 3 years. Jared walked away with less than $1,000. And I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean, like someone had washed off the years of manipulation, silence, and guilt. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need fire. All I needed was distance, and I had finally given it to myself. I didn't hear much about Jared for a while after the divorce. The last communication was a vague, bitter email titled "Hope You're Happy Now," full of half-baked accusations and one particularly pitiful line that stuck with me longer than it should have. "You destroyed our family." As if there was anything left to destroy. As if he hadn't been the one chiseling away at it every time he lied, manipulated, or sat back while his mother turned me into a maid with a paycheck. Still, part of me wondered where he'd go. I figured he'd end up back with Gloria. She always swore she'd do anything for him. Always called him her good boy, her brave soldier, as if faking disability and emotionally starving his wife were acts of nobility. And I was right, he did go to her. But from what I heard, it didn't last. He showed up at her door with a half-zipped duffel bag and a cheap wheeled suitcase. She let him in, because of course she did. But the woman who answered wasn't the same Gloria I'd known. She was tired, too old to carry his entitlement anymore, too done with the delusions she helped build. At first, she gave him the guest room, but she didn't cook for him, didn't stock his favorite snacks. She didn't ask how he was sleeping. From what a mutual acquaintance later told me, she barely spoke to him at all. After a few weeks, she started locking the fridge at night. "You eat like a teenager," she told him. "You don't bring an income. You don't clean. What am I supposed to do? Go broke feeding a grown man?" I should have felt something when I heard that. Pity maybe, or satisfaction. But mostly I felt nothing. Jared tried to find work, or so I was told. But after so many years off the record, no one wanted to hire him. His resume had holes big enough to fall into. No references. No certifications. He hadn't even bothered to keep up with basic skills. So he took the only job he could get, manual labor. Construction. Concrete hauling. Lifting steel. Tasks that made his already damaged back scream by noon. But now there were no more doctors to write notes. No more lawyers to bluff. No more wives to carry him. It was just him, gravity, and the consequences of a story he'd written for himself. Meanwhile, Gloria stopped returning his calls during the day. And at night, she muted the TV when he walked into the room. Eventually, she started telling people, "He's not my problem anymore." From what I know, Jared now lives in the tiny back room of her duplex. It used to be a storage space. No windows, a mattress on the floor, a cracked lamp. He's asked a few friends for money, but no one's answered. People remember things. They remember what kind of man he was when life handed him a woman who would have walked through fire for him, and he chose to sit and warm his hands while she burned. Back in Paris, my life had grown quieter, but fuller. Paige was thriving. She'd made friends, joined an after-school art program, and even started a little blog about weird things in French grocery stores. She didn't ask about her father. Not anymore. One night, as we sat on the balcony together, she leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "You're happier here, aren't you?" I didn't lie this time. Yes, I said. I am. She smiled and nodded, as if that answer gave her permission to be happier too. And Grant? He remained steady, present. He never tried to save me, which is probably why I felt safe around him. There was a gentleness to him that didn't ask for anything. We'd walk through little side streets after dinner, and he'd point out things most people ignored. A carved lintel, a rooftop garden, the scent of lavender blooming in a tiny crack in the sidewalk. He didn't need me to be anyone but myself. That, more than anything, taught me what love was supposed to feel like. Not duty, not fear, not sacrifice that left me empty, but stillness, ease, trust. One night, after walking me home from work, Grant paused at the door to my building. He looked at me, not with expectation, but with hope. "When you're ready," he said softly, "I'd like to take you somewhere. Just the two of us. Doesn't have to be far. Just away. Somewhere that's yours." I didn't answer him then, but I remember feeling the warmth of that offer deep in my bones, like something I didn't even know I needed had finally arrived. For years, I'd measured love by how much I was willing to endure. Now I was learning a different formula. Love, it turned out, didn't need to hurt. It just needed to be real. It hit me one morning while I was folding Paige's school uniform. Steam still curling off my coffee mug. The quiet had changed. When I first arrived in Paris, silence felt terrifying, like a void where guilt used to live. Now it felt like a pause, a breath, a gift. I hadn't heard Jared's voice in over 2 months. No emails, no voicemails, no threats. Gloria had gone silent too. The last I heard, she'd told a neighbor he made his bed. Let him lie in it. I imagined her sitting on her old recliner, arms crossed, pretending she hadn't built that bed with her own 2 hands, stuffing it with lies and manipulation. Part of me thought I'd feel triumph, like this was my grand moment of revenge. But I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted peace. And more than that, I wanted to forget what it felt like to beg for the bare minimum and call it love. Grant came by that evening. He brought wine and fresh bread from the market. Paige had gone to a sleepover, so it was just the two of us. We sat on the balcony, the Paris sky melting into violet and ash. He didn't say much. He never did when I was lost in thought. That was what I loved about him. He let silence exist. He trusted it the way most people feared it. After a while, I turned to him and asked, "Did you ever think I was weak? For staying as long as I did?" He looked at me, his eyes soft and clear. "No, I think you were exhausted, and still trying." I nodded slowly. I think part of me wanted to be the kind of woman who fixes everything, who doesn't give up, who stays no matter what. "You were," he said, "and now you're the kind of woman who saved herself. Both are strong." That night, I cried for the first time in months, not out of sadness, but because someone had finally said what I'd never let myself believe, that I wasn't broken, that I had been enough, even when the people I loved convinced me I wasn't. I used to think love meant endurance. That staying in pain proved my loyalty, that if I just gave a little more, bent a little further, swallowed a little deeper, I'd finally be loved back. But the truth is, real love never requires you to disappear. Jared never hit me. He never screamed. He didn't have to. He made me invisible with 1,000 small silences, 1,000,000 tiny dismissals. He made my pain feel excessive, my exhaustion feel dramatic, my accomplishments feel like luck. He didn't need to break me. He just needed me to believe I wasn't whole to begin with. And I did. For far too long I did. But not anymore. The morning after that conversation with Grant, I booked a weekend away. Just the two of us. A cottage near the lavender fields in Provence. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't need anyone's blessing. I looked at Paige and said, "I'm going away for a few days, sweetheart." She smiled. "With Grant?" I nodded. "Good," she said. "You laugh more when he's around." I almost cried again. We went. We didn't do anything extraordinary. We read books on the porch. We cooked pasta. We walked through fields in silence. One night, I sat in the grass and stared up at the stars and said quietly, I didn't think this was possible. Grant reached for my hand and whispered, it always was. And I believed him, because I was no longer the woman who needed to be rescued. I was the one who got out. I was the one who said enough. I was the one who gave her daughter the version of a mother who didn't cry in locked bathrooms or flinch at phone notifications. Now, when Paige laughs, it doesn't sound like relief. It sounds like joy. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see someone I'd want my daughter to become. And when I think of Jared, if I think of him at all, I don't feel rage. I feel distance, like a bad dream I woke up from, like a house I moved out of, like a name I stopped answering to. For years, I thought choosing myself meant failure. But now I know choosing myself was the most radical act of love I've ever done. Not just for me, but for the little girl who grew up believing love had to hurt, and for the daughter who now knows better. My name is Lillian Parrish, and this time I'm not going back. Ever.